Mechanics, mechanics, mechanics. Well, I wanted that to be the first words I said on the first 3 live streams I've done. So the first time I said once, the second time I said it twice, but now I just said it 3 times, but I just accidentally said, and we are live. But okay, anyway. So the reason I say that at the beginning of every live stream is because mechanics are a central theme to what I'll be talking about. That makes more sense if I'm talking about physics and things of the material world. But yeah, a big theme of pathfinding is that even when I move on to theology and ontology and philosophy, metaphysics, even spiritual things, everything has to be grounded in mechanics. Everything has to have a mechanical explanation. I know there are many things in life which we think are just magical and poetic, but actually everything has a mechanics to it. And ideally, everything should be able to be explained in terms of mechanics. And there are a lot of things in life, especially in metaphysics or religion, that aren't explained in mechanical terms. So Pathfinding is a YouTube channel, a Facebook page, a Twitch channel, where we do live streams and also create videos. And the idea is that whatever we talk about, there must be relatable mechanics to it. Even if we talk about symbols, my understanding of symbols, even symbols whether in the Bible or elsewhere, they should always relate to things that we're familiar with, that have a mechanical description. If you can describe a watch or a steam engine or a combustion engine in terms of mechanics, then you should be able to describe the human body, the human mind, the human soul, anything in terms of mechanics, rather than saying it's beyond us, we can't understand it. So, the first 2 episodes, the first one is just a general welcome to pathfinding. The last week I did a What is Pathfinding? That was a 2-hour stream where I basically talked about the different themes and topics that I'll be going pathfinding. So really this is the first episode of Pathfinding, and I've titled it the universal structure of life. And it's basically going to be about tree structure, branching structure, how it permeates everything, it's in everything, everything's made of it. And I guess a little bit of housekeeping first of all. If you're watching on YouTube, just be aware that we have a Twitch channel where we're streaming to all 3 channels now, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So maybe go over to Twitch if you've got an account there and follow on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, and I guess like on Facebook. Okay, so let me just load up the chat window. Okay then, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I don't even have a title screen. So I have a huge number of pictures that I've been preparing and saving and editing over the years just to make this point. I'm going to be talking about trees and tree structure. So let me start with this beautiful picture of a tree to start with then. I might dodge my head left and right a little bit because I've got the camera right in front of the monitor. I like to look at the monitor and the camera lens at the same time. So yeah, I wanted to start out very simply by just showing this picture and asking the question, if you showed this picture to somebody and asked them, what is this? What would they generally answer, most people? Well, most people would say, it's a tree. And, but if you showed this picture to somebody, wait a minute, I'm doing this a bit wrong. I realize that now. I should be having it up like this so you can actually see what I'm showing you. So yeah, if you show this picture to somebody and ask, what is it? They would say it's a tree. And that's a common answer. It's just an instinctive answer. But if you showed, just activate this. If you showed this picture to somebody and said, what is this? They might say it's part of a bicycle. Or because I've cut the picture directly in half, they might say it's half a bicycle. And if you showed this icon and asked them what this is, they might look at it sideways a bit, but they'd get it after a while, especially if they'd just seen the bicycle picture, and they'd say, well, that's half a person, half a man. And if you cut it in half the other way, they would still probably say it's half a person or the top half of a person. But this is a person, this is a man. And the most common thing is when people see this, they would say, oh, that's an iceberg. Everybody's seen the Titanic and everybody's heard about icebergs. So they'd say that's an iceberg. But in reality, we've all heard the phrase tip of the iceberg. So it's not even half an iceberg, is it? It's like maybe 10% of an iceberg. So the majority of icebergs are underwater. So this is not an iceberg, it's part of an iceberg. This is an iceberg, a full iceberg. So in the same way, when we see this and we say it's a tree, really the correct description of this picture is it's half a tree, because this is a tree. The roots underground are often like this render, they're often just as long and wide and voluminous as the part of the tree above ground. And so we see half a tree and we say it's a tree. So today I'm actually going to talk about not only tree structures, the roots and the branching structure, but also the function. And I'm going to go into some strange areas and show you areas of life that are basically tree structures that you might not have thought were tree structures. So this is kind of an ontological talk. Ontology is the study of existence or sets of things or the nature of things. So really, I'm not actually going to be talking about trees. I'm going to be talking about life and all existence. And it's quite miraculous, actually, how everything conforms to a similar branching structure with lots of variations. So let's have a look at some examples, first of all, of trees. Well, most of the pictures will be half trees. So this is a bamboo. Obviously, trees have very different structures. Sometimes the branching is very prominent, sometimes it's minor. This is a bush, not technically, wouldn't be classified as a tree, but it's really a distinction that we impose. Basically, it's the same universal structure. You've got the roots underneath and the branching out, less of a trunk. This is a plant, and you get the idea. All you see here is some can you see my cursor? All you see here is a few leaves, not so much branching like a tree, but still they're branching off from the trunk. And of course the flower part branches off. And then at the bottom you have the roots. And there's a word called reductionism, and it means, I think it means when you reduce something down. For example, if you look at the branch of a tree, you sort of see the same structure as the whole tree. So here's a close-up of a leaf, and you can see even the veins within the leaf, they conform to this branching structure. And this is a little artistic render that I like. I didn't make it, but found it on the internet and I liked it. Especially, I'm not so much going to be talking about fruit and seeds. That's for another talk. But yeah, this is the basic structure of a tree. And actually, if I just go to this, if you see this, oh wait a minute, can you see? Yeah, if you see this just here, right? I got this ornament which I found on Amazon, which I really liked, because here you can see where the roots, they connect to the branches as they hang down, and you can actually see in some ways a tree is a tree on a two-dimensional plane. A tree is a circle, and on three-dimensional plane, of course, a tree is often like a spherical shape. So let's have a look at a few more. This is a silhouette version of that. I like this one because it looks very almost non-organic in the way the branching is very geometric. And I took this picture of a tree. I took it in Korea. And sometimes generally trees grow straight up towards the sun, but sometimes they have weird bending shapes. And it's interesting to explore the reasons. Sometimes there might have been a wall there, or there's all sorts of other reasons why a tree might not be straight. This is an artistic version of a tree. Another close-up of a leaf with all the veins so it can dissipate the oxygen. And it's just interesting how you see the branching structure in every aspect. These are the roots of a tree. And this is interesting because you get to see the roots, whereas most trees, you don't really get to see the roots. These are more desert-style trees. So trees, although they have like a huge amount of variety in their design, they all do still conform to that roots, trunk, branching structure. Took this a long time ago. Took this outside my apartment when I was living in Korea. Same, a bush. So like I say, a bush is basically just a tree. So every species of tree is different from each other, but in some ways, they're all the same. I took this in Hong Kong. This is just a scary tree. Wait a minute. I've done it again, haven't I? But do I have to go back about 10 pictures, I think? Sorry about that. Still getting used to live streaming. In fact, I need to get a monitor that's just above the monitor I'm looking at with the examples so that I can remind myself what scene I'm on. Okay, so let's go back. This is the one that I said was geometrical. I just jumped through them. A leaf, branches that are visible, desert trees, regular trees, bushes. All right, yeah. This is a picture I took in Hong Kong. This tree looks like it's a dead tree, but it looks a bit like a monster, so I like that picture. So if you start to look at trees enough, you just start to realize that the branching structure of all of them is interesting. Even the bark on a tree, if you look at mountain ranges from satellites, they look so similar to bark on a tree, where you've got the valleys and the higher points, but you see the branching structure even over the bark. This is an X-ray of not a daffodil, but I'm not sure what it is. Tree washed up on the beach. So even the seed pods have protective spikes, which are also branching structures. This is a fantastic one. You can really see the branching structure here. It doesn't matter how far you reduce it down like a fractal. There's a larger one there. Artistic picture. So you get the picture. Trees come in all shapes and sizes and bush types. This guy is, what do they call it, tree husbandry? He basically grew a tree and put limiters on it to shape it so that eventually it became a chair with shade. And this is, I think it's one tree, but it's coiling around itself. Gigantic trees. Fern, this is a fern, but again, if you look at even a small branch coming off here, it's basically the same shape as the entire thing. And even a branch off the branch is the same. This tree curved around on itself in the beginning. It's quite interesting. And I took this with an iPhone 3GS about 10 years ago in Korea. I thought it was interesting is somebody had cut the tree down, but the branches, it was one of those trees that cling to walls. The branches stayed on the walls, and I thought it looked pretty cool. And this is this, which I bought on Amazon. Yeah, I really like this. Actually, mine's a bit different because mine's got some doves in it. And again, I like this type of render of tree which recognizes that trees are kind of like spheres. So this is a few pictures of trees that I collected to show you. Now I'm going to move on to another folder, and we're going to diverge from actual trees a little bit, but we're going to see how the same branching structure can be found in so many areas in nature. So this is called an alluvial fan, and basically the water, snow melts on mountaintops, and also mountaintops gather rain, and as it flows down the mountain, it all, just like the roots of a tree, it starts off with small tricklets here and there, little streams, but they eventually find each other and they merge, and all the roots of the river at the top of the mountain come down and they merge into one larger river, which is like the roots and then the larger just central trunk, like the trunks of a tree. And then when they reach the bottom of the mountain, they branch out and spread out. So yeah, they call this an alluvial fan. And this is one in Afghanistan. You can see the river further back off the picture. To the left, it would have been all the different tiny bits of streams all converging. Then you get the central trunk like a tree, and then you get the branching system. All these green areas here, because this is the desert, but it irrigates the soil around where the water fans out. So this is where they grow all the rice and different crops around the location. That's pretty cool. This is actually, I think this was some kind of plant or town that got a bit washed away by a mudslide. But yeah, you can see the water comes down and it converges. And here's a more clear example of a branching structure, a closer up of the Afghanistan one. This is kind of a bit like a delta where it runs down the mountain and it flows out into the ocean or the sea, but just before it does, you can again see it starting to branch out. And now this is an example of one that really almost looks like it's trying to imitate a tree. This is the Nile River in Egypt. As the Nile reaches the Mediterranean Sea, you can see all along the Nile where the fertile ground is. And then as it reaches the Mediterranean Sea, it branches out. And in this case, it's interesting, just like a tree, you get the mountains further down south, all the small rivers converge on each other, then you get the central trunk like a tree or a plant, and then the branching structure. But in all these areas where it's branched out, they're growing crops, so it's almost like a fruit growing on a tree. This is a map of Brazil, you know, the Amazon. I think it's the longest river in the world, but it's just amazing how it looks almost like veins in a body. This is amazing. One of my favorites is the Mississippi Delta. So this is kind of weird. It's a river that's shored up by bits of land on either side, even though it goes out into the Gulf of Mexico, I think it is. So, yeah, again, this is the Afghanistan Delta. Here you can see huge rivers, practically as wide as, well, huge lakes or almost seas. But again, you can see always the branching structure there. So the reason I'm showing all this is because I want it to, no pun intended, to wash over you. I want you to see initially that there's branching structure in everything. But later we're going to talk about what causes the branching structure and what the deeper principles behind it and what it means for our existence. So here's another beautiful alluvial fan. And here's a wider shot of the Mississippi Delta. That's just an incredible branching structure there. A close-up of it. Another shot, you basically got two of them. All right, this is, actually, it's probably in the wrong folder, but I've got another folder with light. This is lightning, but I'm going to be doing an experiment where I make a negative image of trees, of rivers and lightning, and just to illustrate just sometimes how difficult it is to tell which is which. They have that similarity. I mean, one is electrically charged particles in the air, which encounters resistance or lack of resistance here and there, and that charts the course of lightning. The other one is water running down, well, downwards from a hill or from a topographical slope. And then it encounters resistance in the rocks and the soil. So it charts the easiest course, but they somehow make very similar shapes. And here's another, I'm not sure if this is quite a delta, but this is a beautiful, this is almost like a squid. There's more rivers flowing into the oceans. Again, the Mississippi Delta. This is an interesting one. This is snow and ice. And the river down there is, you can see it snaking around. It's sort of melting the ice and it's spreading out as well. So you'd almost think this was a picture of a tree. This is Brazil, and I believe it's the Amazon. I mean, it could be wrong. But you can just see that the rivers out there, they're just everywhere and they branch out. Like, they could almost be lightning, or it could almost be something in biology. And here's, I'll be showing this picture later. This is a large river area. Again, this is the Nile River in Egypt, I believe. There it is, the same picture. Right, so that's rivers and deltas, which amazingly have a similar structure to trees. So let's move on now to, well, these are some similar type things. So these are more mountain ranges which have a similar tree structure as well. So you get the higher and lower parts of the mountain, the valleys and the larger valleys and the rocky outcrops. And then you can see that same branching off structure that just appears. Even with these little crags that go up there, they all have that same interesting structure. Again, a large alluvial fan with all the rice paddies around the areas. So look, more. You see it coming down from the mountain there and it's spreading out. More of them. Here you can just see just rivers everywhere, a bit like the Ozarks, I guess. It's a beautiful picture and a beautiful sunset picture, but you can really get a sense of just how the water just wants to equalize, and so it just finds branching points. Again, more branching structures from trees. This is a mountain range from a high up, a satellite view, and snow on the top of the mountains and the reddish clay. But you can really see it almost looks like a fractal. I think we've seen that squid image from earlier. This is a beautiful one as well. Just different types of branching structures, but always branching. It's just mountain ranges with branching. So I took this picture myself in Yeosu, South Korea in 2009 maybe. And I just found it interesting the way when the tide comes in, it washes away parts of the sand. And Yeah, you almost see like this, similar to like alluvial fan. So it's almost the same structure, whether it's on a gigantic 1,000-mile range or just a 1 meter range. Is part of the same beach as well. It's just the tide comes in and the sand, which is a bit weaker, just erodes. But you can start to see the branching structure. And here I took a close-up of the water when the tide pulls back and it finds its most efficient way through the sand as it goes down the beach. But yeah, there's other pictures that you can find in this video that, like this, this is probably a 10 or 15 mile space, and this is a 10 or 15 centimeter space. And it's just amazing how that same branching structure appears in nature everywhere. There's more fractal looking mountain ranges and rivers. These are beautiful deltas. That's an amazing one. So that picture keeps popping up. I must like it. So yeah, I just wanted again to let these river images wash over you. So now let's move on from, whoops. Let's move on to the next folder where we're going to have a little departure. So we're going to look at human biology. Let's start out with pictures of the body. Do you see a branching structure here, a tree structure here all? Let me just change my view a little bit. So here on this picture, it's actually fascinating how it's just similar branching structure to a tree. So if you consider a tree has roots that all converge, they start out with many branches at the bottom of the roots. Here you've got 10 toes. They all converge. The 5 toes converge into one. And then the 2 legs converge into one. And then when you get to the top, they diverge again. They branch off in the upper limbs, the arms, and then even the arms themselves branch off again into the nails. And of course, it branches off into the hair. So it's thousands and thousands of branching structures. So let me just have a look at some other pictures. So here's a muscular system in the body. It's not as easy to see the branching structure because it's just so dense, but actually that's what muscles are. They're just lots and lots of little strands. It's a digestive system. There's branching structure in there, but I'll show that later. So skeleton is a really interesting one. So the skeleton, of course, I've shown you the outside of the body where the toes converge into legs, legs converge into trunk, the torso diverges into arms and head and fingers. And so now let's look at this one. This is their vascular system. So you've got the heart there, and the heart pumps blood in order to transport many things, but primarily oxygen. So that you breathe into your lungs get infused, all the veins in your lungs get infused with oxygen, and then your heart forces it, and your veins force it all around your body. But you can see the branching structure clearly there. It's very tree-like, isn't it? Again, with the skeletons, especially even more so than the arms and legs. If you look at the rib cage, from the central spinal column, you get the same branching off structures. Always there's branching in everything, branching off. And I'm actually in the next talk, I'm going to be talking about this. So right now I'm talking in a more of an ontological way about the natural world. I forget which camera, the natural world. But the next talk, I'm going to be talking about how we can see this same natural world, almost scientific principle expressed in metaphorical language in the Bible. So in the Garden of Eden, when it talks about God put Adam into a deep sleep and from a rib he made Eve, it sounds fantastical, even silly. So I'm going to be linking it to this, so I won't go into too much about the skeletal structure and what that means. But yeah, it'll be a really interesting take on the Adam and Eve story. But for this talk about tree structure, I just want to impress upon you how the branching structure is everywhere in nature, from universe-sized, galaxy-sized things down to like the microcosmic things. And really how the reason why this is the very first talk I'm giving on pathfinding is because every single talk I give after that, and I have about 60 arranged, every single talk I give will in some way or another have its foundations in this talk. So this is a foundational talk because the principles that we're going to get at, and right now we're just talking about the external structure of branching structure. But the principles we're going to be discussing in this talk will be applicable to everywhere. And also, I should give you a warning, because this occurred to me about 15 years ago, how branching structure is in everything. So I looked deeper and deeper into it. And after a while, you can get a little bit obsessed, because then you just start, once you see it, once you've had your eyes open, you start to see everything and everywhere. Even things that you didn't think were branching structure oriented, yeah, you start to see it everywhere. And this is just the structure of trees. We're also going to be talking about the function. So it's the digestive system. So here's another vascular system one. Yeah, I love this picture because it's it really shows you that almost everything in a human body is very tree-like in its branching structure. This is a kind of an outlandish, somewhat gruesome picture of the whole human body. And you can see it's just full of branching structures, almost every aspect. And this is more of a mixed X-ray type picture. So this is, I believe this is the endocrine system. So the human body has lots of branching structures in it. It's got the nervous system, the endocrine system, the vascular system. Okay. I always think I can get out that way, don't I? So let's have a look at the next one, which is the human brain. So we're staying with the human biology here. So this is a render, so it represents electricity. But yeah, in the human brain, it's just full of neurons, and they almost look like galaxies somehow. And this is a 3D rendering for scientists to understand just what the brain structure is really like. And it's just, it almost looks like hair, doesn't it? But it's actually, it's just branching structure. And here is a picture of a neuron in the brain, and another picture, which is a supercluster of galaxies. So, you know, galaxies are gigantic, right? Galaxies have, I think galaxies are supposed to have 100 billion stars in each galaxy. But then they have something called a supercluster of galaxies. Well, I'll spoil it for you. The picture on the left is a neuron in the brain, and the picture on the right is a supercluster of galaxies. So even if you move to the periphery, one tiny pinprick of light could be our whole galaxy with 100 billion stars. And these superclusters of galaxies, they don't just evenly spread out in the universe. They seem to have strands coming off them with thousands of galaxies, and it's just fascinating that inside the tiny human brain and the supercluster of galaxies, there's so much similarity. So there's another artistic render of what the brain is like. Here we've got the brain with all the neurons and also the oxygen delivering systems. This is, I believe, the endocrine system, which produces all the hormones throughout your body. Again, that same branching structure. A bit gruesome, but this is the nervous system here. Everything your brain knows and thinks, everything you see, is collated from the body's senses and channeled up to the brain to deliver information. Brain's really a supercomputer just processing vast amounts of information. And yeah, the nervous system takes all this, everything in the body. Look at this. It's I believe it's a nerve ending or it's a neuron, I think. So everything in the body is same branching structure. If you go right close up to the neurons, they're all networked. That's why they're branching structure. They're networks. So here they pass chemical electrical signals to each other, and that's how you think. It's just a neural network. And yeah, in the brain, you've got the vascular system delivering blood. What's interesting is the veins are a bit permeable, which means the chemicals and oxygen and all sorts of things inside your veins can leak through the walls of your veins and your arteries. We're actually going to be doing a talk about that as a metaphor for something else. But when they reach the brain, there are certain things in the brain which it's not good for you to get those chemicals in. So actually the vascular system, as it permeates, as it works its way through the brain, has a coating on it, like a seal, to stop anything leaking out into the brain that shouldn't be there. And so that what's being transported in the veins only gets to where it's supposed to go. Right. Yeah, more endocrine system, neurons, kind of the brain. Again, it almost looks like a galaxy. All noggin there. So, yeah, even the brain itself it's a branching system. So it's divided into two halves. Some people have epilepsy so bad though in the past they used to like just sever one half of the brain. So it's just dead in the head. I didn't mean to rhyme that, but and the people they can seemingly function normally with just half a brain. So some more neurons there. Okay, now let's jump over to another part of the body, which is, the nervous system and the lymphatic system. Bit gruesome, but that's what biology is, isn't it? In a way. So this is the nervous system, a picture of a real nervous system. And the branching structure is there again. It's just branch after branch after branch spreading out everywhere so that you can feel your environment. These are nerves as they thread through your spinal cord. I believe this is either endocrine or lymphatic system. I am not a doctor. But again, I think this is a nervous system. They just made it green. But again, this is just this branching structure. Again, so you've got the branching structure of the actual outer shell with the diverging, converging branches of the arm, limbs and fingers. And then you've got the branching structures of the vascular system with it, and then the branching structures of the nervous system and the lymphatic system. And even the bones themselves. Everything's branching. It's amazing. So, again, it's the nervous system shredding throughout all your spinal cord. Almost every single thing in the body has a branching structure. That's a bit gruesome. Somebody actually pasted a nervous system to a picture frame. All right, so that's the lymphatic and nervous system. Let's have another closer look at the skeleton system. So I'm particularly fond of ribs. Not in restaurants. I mean, ribs are quite fascinating. You have the spinal cord. So you have the spinal cord, and then you have the rib cage, and it's just a classic example of a branching structure. That's what human beings are. They're just branching structure after branching structure. So look for the next talk. So what does it mean that God took a rib off Adam and made Eve? It's really a existential section of the Bible, which is really talking about the origin of human beings. And I see it as a metaphor, not literal. And so I'll be talking about how the same branching structure principles I'm talking about in this talk can be used to decipher seemingly strange occurrences and phrases in the Bible. But what's amazing about them is that they were written thousands and thousands of years ago before we'd had all this scientific understanding of things. But we'll get to that in the next talk. So here's the bone. Bones are very interesting. Not everybody seems to know where blood comes from, but blood is made inside the bones. So bones are not just super strong and sturdy to hold us up and give us strength, but they're the manufacturing plants for blood. And then the blood makes its way out of the bone and into the vascular system and around your body. So the skeleton is just another branching system. Yeah, it's just more pictures of skeletons just to impress upon you that fact. Okay. Right. And then, a few more pictures of the vascular system. This is really fascinating. These are the lungs. And as I said before, the lungs are basically the terminus of the vascular system. And they're, like a terminus in a bus station is where all the people get on the bus, right? All the people let me just change that. All the people get on the bus and then they're transported where they need to go. So the lungs is, you breathe in, the air contains a lot of oxygen. What is it? 21% of it is oxygen. And then the vascular system in your lungs is so fine, the air can permeate through the walls of the veins and enter. The oxygen gets forced into the bloodstream and carried away. And then it transports all around the body. It supplies the brain with fuel, lots of organs. And this is a pretty gruesome but interesting graphic. Well, it's like a claymation model of the heart. And again, it's just branching system everywhere. Interestingly, I used to think that the heart pumps the blood all around your body. And it does, but apparently all your veins pulse, kind of like the way you swallow, right? You get the muscles that push the food down. All your veins pulse as well to push the blood around your body. This is, I believe this is somebody who got struck by lightning, and it causes permanent mark on their arm, which is fascinating. Again, this is the heart, which pumps the blood to all the branching structures in your body. There's another picture of the body with the vascular system. So as we see it, there's the lungs again. As we see more and more of these pictures, we start to get the image that the human body is just completely designed based on branching system. Just like if you look at forests, all these trees, all these bushes, all these flowers, they're all the same. So yeah, it's just branching off. I'm starting to sound obsessed, aren't I? There's the lungs. Starting to sound a bit obsessed with branching structure, but that's because I've been through that already, haven't I? Yeah, that's because there's deep meaning to it. A branching structure is either something converging or something diverging, but it's everywhere in nature. There's the plant, and there's the lungs. It's shocking sometimes how similar they are. Okay. Muscular. Then I just have an eclectic collection of pictures of human anatomy, which just illustrate just how everything is branching structure. That's a cell dividing when it gets destroyed by cancer. This is an interesting picture somebody took just to illustrate that the patterns on a leaf, the branching structure in a leaf, are just like the human body. Digestive system, the DNA is branching structure, hairs. Yeah, the muscular system, because it coats the whole body. It doesn't look like it, but you can actually see the constant hairs and branching structure there. Inside the brain, the baby. I don't want to gross anybody out, but it's just fascinating. Even inside the eye, look here, the muscles and the tendons and the veins that connect the iris. All throughout the eyes, there's veins. What's interesting about the eye is you can do an experiment where if you get a tiny, lower the light in the room and get a tiny light, maybe like a little tiny beeping light from a phone. Well, not beeping, just on. And then if you move the light, you can see it. Even if you don't look at it, you can see it with your peripheral vision. But if you move the tiny light to a certain point somewhere off axis on your peripheral vision, it disappears. And that's because every eye has a blind spot. So it's lucky we have two of them. And so the light disappears, and that's because these veins you see here, they all collect at a junction point where it gets really thick at a certain point of the eye, and that blocks the light from hitting the cones at the back of your eye to the light-sensitive cells. But because your blind spot's at a different angle on each eye, the single picture in your brain doesn't notice that there's a part of the picture missing. And it's interesting because that's like a metaphor for couples. Between a husband and wife, they both have a slightly different angle point of view. They see the same things, but they have a slightly different angle point of view in their relationship, the way they see life and their family. And it's only when each recognizes that they have blind spots in some areas and they trust from past experience that their spouse understands things that they can't always see. And so when they're told something is so, but they don't see it, so they think, I don't see any evidence for that, they trust in their partner, and their partner can guide them, and vice versa. And so they can overcome blind spots in the same way that the eye has a different angle, but it's the unified vision that helps the brain see clearly. Here's the ear, again, the brain, the different layers of the brain stem. That's the lizard brain there, and then the higher functions. But everything looks like a plant, looks like a branching structure. All right, so animals and humans is inside of a cell. Animals and humans and trees have some similar branching structure. So yeah, you might ask, what does that mean? Here you see the branching structure of the fingers and the bones within and the nerves within and the vascular system within. Just layer upon layer of branching structure. Even DNA has a branching structure. So let's just... Okay, I think you get the picture there. That's human anatomy. And then let me just quickly do a few. There's not many to do here. I've got a few animal anatomy ones. So this, well, it should be a bit bigger. This is a sea creature. It's crazy, right? This sea creature basically looks like a plant. Old sea creature. There's another sea creature. I don't even know what it's called. But it just shows you can go right to the bottom of the ocean where there isn't even any light. Another sea creature. Right to the bottom of the ocean. And the same principle branching structure. Another sea creature. More sea creatures. And you just get the same branching structure wherever you go. Well, that's not an animal. Oh, is that an animal? Oh yeah, that's you can hardly see it, but that's actually some kind of caterpillar on a leaf. And so yeah, the caterpillar's body practically matches the leaf's vascular system. And this is the horrible one. It's actually a recent discovery in Japan. It's a worm, but instead of just being one trunk or with legs, it actually has a branching structure itself. And this is a slime mold. Not really considered an animal, I believe. It's more closer to bacteria or something. Or, no, I think it's biological, it's life. But yeah, these slime molds, they do a lot of research with them because they, no pun intended again, they're very good at pathfinding to find sources of nutrition and life. So they model computers with them. Here's elks and their antlers. Again, even their antlers have a branching structure. This is a truly disgusting one. It's a kind of a worm, and it suddenly spits out its tongue, and its tongue just sticks to everything, and then it pulls everything back in. But, you know, to get an efficient shot on whatever it's shooting at, it does it in branching structure. Alrighty. Animal anatomy. And here I just thought I'd show some interesting... These are flora, plants which looks like humans. So the ginseng is often considered to look a bit like a human being. These are the roots of a ginseng plant. Ginseng tea is supposed to be really good for you, but I lived in Korea, and even if it is, it's just so horrible to drink, so I don't drink it. So, yeah, I think I took this thing. This is an upside down. I took a picture of a tree upside down in Korea because I thought it almost looks like a torso and some legs. More ginseng. This is a tree that obviously like the guy with the chair, somebody shaped it to look like a dancing ballerina. So I put these two pictures together because I thought it was cute. And yeah, this is a picture which has a very feminine aspect to its trunk at some point. This one wasn't shaped to be like that, but it almost looks like a female who's frozen. This is some kind of root which looks like an ogre's foot. Old manuscript. Yeah, that's another tree. It's a branching, but I turned it upside down so it looks like legs. All right, those are just more amusing ones. So then, here's some pictures that I'm not talking about theological stuff today, but here's some pictures that I found interesting that are related to Bible stories. This is a chap called Absalom, and he was the son of King David. And he was not too happy about the fact that his other half-brother, because David had a few wives and lots of children, his other half-brother raped his half-sister. And so David forgave him, and he wasn't too happy about it. So he basically went on the warpath, and there was like a civil war between Absalom's forces and David's. In the end, he lost a battle, and he was racing away on his horse, and he had lots of hair flowing down, and he got caught in the branches tree. And even though King David told the general to spare him if he captured him, actually the general just had his men throw spears into it. Absalom kill him. That was the end of Absalom. This is a classic Renaissance picture of the devil tempting Adam and Eve. So what's interesting about this is it uses symbolism of trees, and we're going to be going into that in the next talk. The Adam's rib one is the one after that. So the very next talk is going to be on this topic. What is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and what is the tree of life? And here's an interesting one. And really, this is why I decided to start thinking about trees, because what I find is that when something's repeated a lot in a book as wise and old as the Bible, I start to think, wow, God really likes using trees as a metaphor or in poetry. God is kind of a bit obsessed with trees. But then I think, could there be some deeper reason why so many times trees and branches and fruit and engrafting and all sorts of concepts related to trees are used in the Bible as metaphors or as teaching tools? So I decided to look deeper into structure of trees and function of trees, and that's why I started to notice tree structure everywhere. Here, this is a message, well, a picture depicting when Moses went up onto the mountain. What's the mountain called? Horah or something? It's not Sinai. That's the one where he got the tablets, I think. Anyway, he went up to the mountain. It's when he first encountered God. It wasn't actually God, because if you read the Bible, it says, "Angel of the Lord appeared to Moses." So people often think it's God spoke to Moses through a burning bush, but that's actually, the Bible literally says the angel of the Lord appeared. So it was an angel talking to Moses. And but what's interesting about the burning bush that Moses encountered is the flames did not consume the bush. So coincidentally, I have a talk about that coming up as well. It's about what that is a symbol for. And then here's another picture of Absalom. You can see him hanging from the branches of a tree. And what I find interesting about this story as well, this story of Absalom catching his hair in the tree. Again, hair is like a branching system from the body, and the branches of the tree are a branching system. It's all about branching. What I find interesting about this story in the Bible is, if you go back further in the Bible, you come across a story. There's Absalom again, getting his hair caught in the tree just before he got executed. But then if you go back further in the Bible, this is, goats, they climb anything, down walls, buildings, they can jump on anything. And this is a ram that happened to get his horns caught on an electrical cable, which, if you look at pylons on things, it's all, again, electrical cables, it's all branching systems. Same with fiber optics or information cables for telephone lines. So I found that picture interesting. But here, this is a picture of the time of Abraham. So Abraham had to do a sacrifice, chop up some doves and some heifers and some rams, cut them in half and do a burnt sacrifice. But by the time he got around to doing the doves, he was tired and he took a nap, and then he just fell into a deep sleep and he failed in his sacrifice. So God said, now you've got to do a more serious one. The reasons why that happened are another story. So God said, well, you have to sacrifice your only son, Isaac. And at the time, Abraham was an old man and his wife, Sarah, was very old. And they'd been trying to have children all their life and they couldn't make it. And so they didn't even believe they could have children. But finally, God blessed them with a child. They loved that child, obviously. And now God's telling them, if you want to show your faith, you have to sacrifice that child. So Abraham was very faithful to God, and he was raising up the knife to sacrifice Isaac. And apparently an angel stopped him and said, leave the lad alone, and instead sacrifice. There's a ram there. And it turned out that a wild ram had happened to have gotten his horns caught in a bush. And I just found it's interesting. There's a kind of a symmetry between this story and the story of Absalom getting his hair caught in the tree. I don't know if it goes beyond just mere coincidence, but I did find it interesting. There's another picture representing that. Okay. So let's have a look at some more areas. Right, now here's more branching structure I took these in Korea. in Korea, I lived there in 2002 to 2010, but they had internet really fast in Korea, but they didn't seem to mind where they put the wires. So this is just a regular neighborhood mast with broadband going to every single house. But you can just see almost like a nervous system, right? But for information. Well, that's what a nervous system is. You can just see that branching structure. These look like USB cables, but these are actually giant buildings. And these are the roads that lead up to the giant buildings. And it just turns out that human beings didn't decide to copy branching structures and plants when they built road systems and towns and facilities. But it just so happens naturally that's the best structure, the most efficient structure. So that's how we build them. This is a town in Italy, which I just thought was interesting. Looks like a man or a woman, or more like a starfish. That's the same town during the daytime. And this is really interesting. This is at Lancaster Gate in Hyde Park in London, and there's a public toilet there. And this worn-out grass here will be recognisable to everybody. This kind of thing. It's actually got a name. It's called a desire path. So the designers of this, the designers of this complex, the toilet complex, thought, well, wouldn't it be good if people walk here, take a 90-degree turn, and go here to go to ladies' toilets, and if the men could go this way and take a 90 degrees turn, and what you can actually see is the women are more polite than the men, because people come in from the Lancaster Gate station this way and think, oh, I need the toilet, and people come from the park on the way to the station and think, oh, I need the toilet, and so when the women come, they say, oh, well, there's the path. I don't want to get my boots dirty or whatever in the winter, so I'll just walk down the path. But when the men are coming, they just think, well, there's my objective over there. Why have I got to walk those 3 extra steps and go around? I'll just cut across the grass. So this is called a desire path. Again, you see a branching structure, and just natural human behavior creates a branching structure. And from a design point of view, which is the right attitude? That they should put a fence down here to force people to go the way they want, or they should recognize the way people want to go, the efficient path to the entrance, and actually put some stone down here to make it an actual path. So it's the latter. You look at the way people behave naturally, and then you design structures around it. And even the way human beings behave and think, it's all related to branching structure. So this is the gas pipes in my apartment building in Korea, which I just found interesting. They put these knobbles on there so people can't put stickers on there, but they do anyway. And just everywhere I go, I just see that same branching, diverging, converging structure. This is ginseng poster. This is a server room with all the computer servers. This is it's a junction for an internet. Another junction, more gas pipes. This is a model of, I think, Yongsan Station in Seoul. And again, even the trains, they do the same thing. They all converge and then they diverge and go the different directions. More internet. This is ventilations. Yeah. So once I started recognizing that branching structure is part of everything, it became a bit of an obsession of mine, because I just started seeing it everywhere. It started to drive me crazy until you get used to it. Even fireworks, right? Everything seems to take the shape of a plant. This clever chap stacked firewood in the shape of a tree. So you could say it's not a natural occurrence, but it came from his creativity. Yeah, I love this picture. This is a highway in Korea, a raised highway, again, branching structure. And most towns and cities, the streets have that same branching structure with the main arteries. We even call these roads arteries, don't we? The main ones for traffic. It's some kind of nuclear fusion reactor engine pipes. Again, just pipes and tubes and branching. I do not even know what this is. Look, I think it's an artificial lung. So more internet. This is an interesting one. This is a wind farm, but these paths here, they are the paths where the maintenance truck drives to service the wind farms. Again, just the same branching and root structure just manifests itself. Nobody decided it should be like that and look like a tree, but human beings, they would drive, for example, you could just tell. They would drive there, and then they would think, well, I've got to go and check this one or this one. I'm surprised there aren't linking pathways. I can't imagine them coming to this one and then driving all the way back and then back up again. But maybe they just have to visit them at different times. So, it's just interesting how that same branching structure manifests in everything. Alrighty, let's have a look at another field, another area. Biblical. All right, going back to nature. You can see branching structure in some things that don't initially look like they have branching structure. So this is like a volcano. So just like muscles in the body, it's just uniform covering everything. So you don't necessarily see the distinct branching structure. But if you look at the water particles here, the way they go up and then the way they spread out, or in this case, coming down and then spread out and create lightning, you can track the same sort of Y shape of the branches. This is a glacier that slowly moves down the mountain. So it moves down much like a river. You know, the ice is kind of like a liquid almost when it melts a little bit, and then it moves slowly. But it spreads out instead of distinct branches. It spreads out in the general shape of a branch. Mountain. You can see the branching structures flowing all the way down to the mountain in every direction where the snow melts. Okay, what else have we got? How far does the obsession go? Okay, now let's look at something on the cosmic level, like I showed you before with the neuron and the galaxy cluster. Well, this is even bigger than a galaxy cluster, because this picture here, which is a galaxy cluster, so one tiniest pinprick of light would be our gigantic Milky Way galaxy with 100 billion stars. And then these would be millions and millions of galaxies. And then you've got something like this, which is a super duper cluster. And that's what the universe looks like. Whether we're looking at the tiniest things or something so big, a big chunk of the universe that you just couldn't imagine it. Our Milky Way, in fact, our supercluster is just a tiny pinprick here. That's how insane it is. And this is an overall picture of the universe. Doesn't look that different from a scan, well, a render of the brain with all the neurons in it. Again, it doesn't matter what the size is. Branching structures is there all the time. There's our planet. This is a representation of the Big Bang. So you might look at this and think to yourself, well, I don't see any branches in there. But branching structure isn't just about physical divergence and convergence. So this point of light here represents the Big Bang. Then there was a period where it was just a super concentrated energy. And then everything starts to form. So for example, even the four forces of electromagnetism, gravity, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force, scientists believe they were all in one unified force just after the Big Bang. But then what happened? Those forces branched out and became distinct forces. And in the same way, this initial material from the Big Bang, eventually you could say it's not branching out, rather it's converging like a root. So for example, all this material comes together through gravitational force and starts to form super clusters of gas like nebula. And then they start to form stars, and then around the stars start to form you get galaxy level, then planets. So again, you get the branching structure. So there's different periods of the history of the 13 billion year universe where you've got something comes together to create something, comes together to get something. Just like the roots of a tree, they're all distinct tiny little filaments of the root, but they all get thicker and thicker and stronger as they converge and join each other. And so initially all this material in the universe was just subatomic particles. Then it became formed together and it formed particles and atoms, neutrons, electrons, and then atoms, then molecules, then actual stars and planets. And so you get the diverging. So there's a galaxy. I don't know if it's our galaxy. So yeah, there's another render of what the universe looks like. So yeah, I think this supercluster area is called Laniakea. It actually looks a bit like those ginseng plants, doesn't it? So it's just amazing how you can find a little tiny plant growing in your back garden, and it has a similar shape to unimaginably massive structures in the galaxy. So yeah, here's a universe structure, and that's a neuron structure. So what's going on? I pointed all this stuff out, whether it's human biology or actual trees. What's going on? Why are we getting all this? Let me go full face with it. Why are we getting all this crazy similarity in structure? Whether it's something on the tiniest level or the biggest level, you might think to yourself, well, something that determines what shape a large chunk of the universe takes. So how can something that's not connected to that at all, some tiny little plant or the vascular system in the body, somehow, or the neurons in the brain, somehow arrive at the similar shape? And so, yeah, that's what we're going to explore here in Pathfinding. So let's have a look at another folder. Oh yeah, so as we explore this kind of thing, it's good to look at anything which has a branching structure. So now I'm jumping away from natural occurrences in things such as plants, biology, or even the galaxy. But even with cracks, we start to see this similar kind of unusual branching structure. That's a reinforced concrete. So I took this picture of paint on a wall, and when it reaches a certain age and it loses some integrity, we start to see again this branching structure appear. I told you I was a bit obsessed, right? That's what. Wait, I'm doing it again, Anna. I'm not showing you the pictures. Let's go back a little bit. Must do better. So yeah, you see the same branching structure and cracks in the glass. That's the typical bullet through light bulb. And in this picture I took on a wall, it just fascinated me how the cracks occur. And then when you start to analyze why did the cracks occur, number one, and number two, why did they occur in this exact specific spot, not a millimeter to the left or to the right or up or down? So when you look at cracks in things, it's interesting. This is a bowl in a Korean traditional tea shop that I noticed the cracks all over. Again, some similar interesting branching structure. Paint on a road. More paint on a road. I love this crack. This is one of my favorite pictures of cracks, actually, because the crack goes along the ground. I took this in Korea. It goes along the ground, but even the ground itself is a branching structure with the mortar between the bricks. But the crack goes along the ground, and these two bricks here are completely separate from each other. And so is this, and so is this one. But the crack has a uniform, reliable path. And then it encounters a vertical wall, and it starts moving up the wall, but it's just a continuous line of crack. So if you just sit and think about it, it's amazing. It's amazing how you can look at the most innocuous, tiny, seemingly dull thing in life, and you can find really profound things about it. So if you actually look at what caused this crack, it's basically just pressure. So this crack line here, this fault line, represents the weak spots. So there's some kind of ground shifting, and a big part of this wall and this side of the ground had pressure pulling it apart from this one. And if the material that it's made of is strong enough, it won't be able to pull it, it will hold it. But if the material is weaker than the pressure being exerted on it, the material will actually lose its integrity and break apart. Just like if you've seen those horrible movies where they torture people by tying people to two horses, and the horses go in different directions and pull their arms off, right? Not to be too gruesome, but that's what happens if the pressure exerted on something is greater than the integrity of the thing, the strength and the bond of the thing, something's got to break. So here what happens is all these bricks, they're bonded with mortar, but over this general area, this crack could have gone in any direction at all. It completely could have gone this way or that way or that way. But at each stage of the crack, the part which is the weakest in the substance gives way. So the crack doesn't actually exist. There isn't such a thing as a crack. It's not a thing that exists. Really, a crack is just an absence of a bond. So all over here, these are all have got integrity and they're bonded together. So this is where the bond was the weakest, And that's what manifests as a crack. I just like the way that it continues up the wall as if it's a thing, almost like a living thing. And I took this picture from a subway crossing the Han River in South Korea. I just found that even the cracks in the ice on the frozen river were interesting. I like this one a lot. I took it again in a traditional restaurant I used to go to in a bowl. I like it because the shape of it is a very simple Y shape. We'll come to that. You know, even chromosomes can be Y. Again, this is like a leathery substance. As it gets older, it starts to get a bit cracked. And yeah, this is also an interesting one in the ground. You can just, it's good to look at cracks because you can really almost visualize, encapsulate in your head. You can hold the image in your head, not of the ground and the crack, but you can almost map the pressure in your head. Obviously, some pressure, trucks going by or just land subsidence, was exerted on this dried concrete. And then eventually, you can find out where the weak spot of the concrete is by which part gives way. So you can see a map of pressure and integrity. Again, this is a beautiful one. It's a picture of a wall. It almost looks like some of the satellite pictures we saw. And this is, broken up ice on the ice shelf. Again, broken up ice. Doesn't matter whether it's a tiny bit of paint on a wall, bit of concrete, or a gigantic ice shelf. The formation's the same. This is a friend of mine, Julian, in Korea. A stone hit his car window, and he didn't get it fixed because it seemed all right, but it just made a beautiful spiral crack there. So you can see the glass. Obviously, that was the weak point because that's where the pressures pulled it apart. This is an amazing ice fissure, not an ice fissure, but a fissure in the ice. And I've shown that before, haven't I? It's in the wrong section. So this is an interesting one. Yeah, I took this also in Korea. This wall looks like it's about to collapse, but I just love the way the cracks manifest. This was outside a shop. It was just dried paint peeling off a wall. Again, cracks, more cracks in paint material. So yeah, cracks are interesting because they're not organic in any way, but they somehow have this, they conform to the same branching structure that we're looking at. What's next? So here we have things that don't necessarily look like tree structure. This is when human beings get involved in nature and we start to manage nature. So here, these are farm fields, high yield crop fields. The circle ones are interesting because the reason why they're circles is because they get less rain. So they build these gigantic sprinklers that go out from the middle and they go around like a clock handle watering the thing. And human structuring, you can see the branching on the structures there, the branching on the roads. It's just in our nature to create branching structures everywhere. And, in Dubai, I think it's Dubai, they built these hotels and these artificial islands. This is a representation of an actual tree. And these are, fields in the desert using irrigation models. Again, even on something that doesn't necessarily look like it's got branching structure, if you look closely at these valleys and these mountain hills, they're very similar. Again, another glacier. This is a crater site where a giant meteor hit. I think it's in Russia. But around it, you can just see branching structures and where the water finds its level. Alrighty. So we started out looking at actual trees, but then we're moving into lots of different areas of life. I'm going to go through these because there's quite a few of them. So lightning, again, it's an interesting one. I'm not a physicist, not a meteorologist. I don't really understand electricity that much, but then again, nobody does. It's all a mystery. But lightning is it's when all the positively charged ions in the air, they reach a critical mass and they find an ignition point, and then the shape of the lightning, similar to the cracks, is interesting. The lightning finds the most efficient conductivity path. It doesn't go in a pure straight line like a beam of light or like a laser beam, like a photon. Instead, it takes a winding path, but actually it takes the most efficient path it can find. So again, just like with the cracks where pressure dictate which way the crack goes. The crack doesn't chart its course and force its way. When humans build highways or rail systems, that's what we do. We cut through mountains. It doesn't matter how stubborn this mountain or that valley is. We'll build a bridge over it. We dictate the course. But with cracks or with lightning, they basically get dictated to by their environment which course they'll take. And let's have a look at some lightning pictures. Bring these up. So, yeah, it's the same. This is artificial lightning. It's the same branching structure that you'll see all the time in everything. I love these. These you get volcanoes. They create weather systems basically, and then they create static. So much static. This looks like something from hell, doesn't it? So much static that they actually get lightning storms on them. Incredible. But yeah, if you were to look at some rivers, for example, if you didn't see the context with the rivers, with the ocean and the clouds, and you just saw the shape, you might think they were rivers. Or you might think they were nervous systems in a body, or vascular systems. That's just fascinating. That's incredible. Alrighty. So we're getting more and more of a picture. I've got a few miscellaneous natural ones, which I collected here, which I find interesting. So here is when a car freezes on the surface, it creates these leaf-like branching structure images. They almost look like rivers, right? It's like a crystalline, well, that definitely is a crystalline subject. So the branches on a leaf, a tiny little leaf, and it has a similar branching structure. So again, this really should be in the cracks folder, because this is wood that's just been ripped off, paint on top of a table, and the wooden wall was ripped off in some derelict building. I found it interesting, because you think to yourself, what determined the exact shape of every strip there and the jagged edges? It doesn't matter how far you go down to the tiniest, let's just zoom in, tiniest little jagged edge. Every tiny little jagged edge there was dictated to by one simple principle, right? As that table was ripped in half by something, gigantic pressure was put on the whole structure of it. And the reason why this part here isn't torn down the middle, but this part is because this part had just a little bit more structural integrity to this part. So this part gave way first, and this part held its integrity. And that's what dictated the shape of every tiny aspect and every large aspect of this kind of thing. And you can see that, when earthquakes happen, giant pieces of land tear from each other. This is a bubble. This was like some kind of coating on my swimming pool window in Korea, in Daejeon. And I found it interesting that this air bubble appeared on the plastic coating on the window and somehow forced its way out. But as it forced its way upwards, it also created a branching structure. And this is a picture I took of an old window that was covered in a metallic kind of sticker substance. It was like a silvery metallic. I just found it interesting that, again, some air bubbles appeared when the sun came out, and probably some gases expanded. And as it did, it pushed out away from the glass, pushed the material out, and then created this similar branching structure. And again, what determined what path this went or that went, again, it would have been that this part of the material was the gluey substance that sticks it to the window would have been just slightly stronger than this part. So this part gave way sooner than this part, and that's the air traveled up that way. And it might sound like a really trivial thing I'm talking about, because I'm talking about some derelict-looking building with a bit of silvery sticker paper on the window that's become a bit deformed. But what I'm going to be driving at, what I'm going to be getting at, is that the fundamental forces of the universe and of life itself are dictated by this very principle. So people often talk about, let me go to full front for a while. People often talk about the four forces of the universe, and they want to unify the four forces, which again are gravity, electromagnetism, strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force. There's an idea that there's got to be a theory which combines them all into one unifying force. But there's another principle that I recognize in the universe, which I think is more fundamental to the four forces of the universe. And it might sound, I don't even know how to name the principle because it sounds so basic and obvious and common sense. But sometimes something can be so obvious and common sense that people just dismiss it as not being significant or important. But actually, I've learned that there's two aspects to truth. There's the external aspect, which is the logic of truth, which is the structure of the truth. And the internal aspect is the significance of it. And so I find this principle that I've been talking about, that you might not even know I've been talking about, that I've been getting at, is super profound because it influences and dictates and everything in life, from biological things to the way we think, to material things, to cracks in windows. And that principle is, if you imagine a scale, right, and you put a weight on one scale and a lighter weight on the other scale, what principle is it that decides which one goes down? You could say that principle is gravity, but not really, because gravity is a force, not a principle. In the same way that if you have two massive stars that come in contact with each other, one's 10 times bigger than the other, the one that's 10 times bigger will consume the smaller one. Or if you have two elephants or two hippo that want to fight for the ladies, then usually it's the one that's just bigger or stronger or has a larger skill set or a bigger skill set of fighting. And then there's a contest to decide. And it's just it's like putting something on the scales. And isn't that, when we think of scales, how we measure things like that, isn't that a little bit like a branching structure, right? In a branching structure, something either goes left or right or up or down. It converges, but what determines that it converges or that it goes one way or the other is the same principle in many cases, most cases, as with the scales. And so the scales are like a symbol for that. But the principle behind it, when the universe first happened, when the Big Bang happened, and the four forces diverged, and then everything that happened in the universe was dictated by this principle. All the galaxies formed, right? And then all the planets formed and the stars formed. They were all influenced and acted upon, especially through gravity. But through other things as well, like nuclear force, electromagnetism. But they were all acted on. And one way or another, this principle was put into effect. Every species that exists on Earth today exists because of this principle. Let's just look at a few more of these. Because they were on a path and they encountered other animals, and the one which was stronger could defeat them, like being on the scales, and they got to continue with their species, and the other species got wiped out or pushed out of the neighborhood. Let's look at a few more pictures. There's a close-up of that one. Yeah, I took this picture walking home because I found the branching structure in the bricks to be a nice juxtaposition with the branching structure in the leaves. There's a branching structure from the lava being shot out of a volcano. Okay. Another one. Oh yeah, this is a bit harder to see branching structure in smokes and fluids. Because they are so fluid, they sort of distribute. They distribute evenly, but actually, that scales principle that I've been talking about sort of comes into play. Every particle of water here, every tiny particle, right down to the H2O molecules, they have a certain energy within them, and when they encounter other particles, they decide they're going to go left or right. They're going to branch off this way or that way. Only that water and smoke is so fluid, it just spreads more evenly and so dense that you don't see a branching structure. But from an individual particle point of view, they actually do encounter some other force, like another particle of water or the air or a rock, and then they decide, I'm going to bounce off and go left, or I'm going to go up or down. And that's what determines river shapes. And all those river pictures we saw is what determines all those things. This is an interesting one. This is a runoff from a dam in Northern California. What it's called? It's Oroville in California. So it's a huge runoff, but the water didn't like the idea of going this way. It had other ideas, and the pressure of the water, probably the pressures from the ground as well, were pulling on this concrete or this stone. Yeah, I think it's concrete. The concrete spillway. And it couldn't handle the pressure, so this is the point where it gave away. This is like one half of a crack, one side of a crack, but there's no other side because it collapsed. So the water basically said, yeah, I don't want to go that way. I want to go this way. And it's that same principle that decided it. It's the principle that this is, if you can almost imagine the scales here. So the principle is like, oh, what am I doing? I'm such a silly person. How many pictures did I fail to show? Because I keep forgetting to do that. I need a monitor in front of me. That does it. I'm doing it this time. So here's the dam. Love this. Oroville Dam in California. It's a gigantic. And they're going to spend something like, I heard it was like $1 billion just to rebuild this part of the dam. And they were talking about what a great engineering challenge it was. But it seems a lot of money, $1 billion to build a spillway. And I don't really understand why they don't just ignore the spillway and just let the water go down the way it wants to go. They talked about they want to avoid soil erosion. It's not like it's going to erode soil for tens of miles. It's just this little bit of area here. And that's what rivers do. Rivers just erode the soil to create the shape of the river. Anyway, so this water coming out of there, it encountered resistance in the form of wrong side. In the form of the sides of this. But either the water or the pressures decided, I'm stronger than your integrity. And that's what determined this shape. It actually created its own branching structure as a result of that contest between integrity and pressure strength. And that's really what one of the fundamental principles of what determines the shape of things in the universe is, from the Big Bang to deciding planet shapes and everything. That principle gets applied again and again. It's a super simple principle, very binary in some ways. Smoke, more smoke. So you almost can't see a branching structure here, but everything's branching out in its own directions, but it's just so, well, there's definitely branching structures there. That's the Jupiter, gigantic fire, all these smoke particles, they're all encountering all sorts of resistance and branching off left and right, but there's just so many of them. Okay. And here's, of course, one of the branching structures that we all love, snowflakes, crystals. It's interesting, I saw an expert being interviewed about snowflakes, and he's been a scientist, he's been studying snowflakes all his life, and he said something interesting. He was quite irritated that people sometimes say, oh, no two snowflakes are alike. And he pointed out that no two blades of grass are alike either. No two anything is alike. For some reason, we're fascinated by the fact that no two snowflakes are alike, but maybe that's because they're so symmetrical. But yeah, in crystals, you see this branching structure again. You know, crystals and biology, human biology are so different, and the branching structures definitely look different, but nevertheless, we see the same fundamental principle of branching structures. All right. Now this folder is one of my favorites as well. It's because the folder is just called stains. And I'm not talking about West London, actual stains. So this is, somebody was painting something and some cement liquid splashed on there, and then this appeared. Actually, this is in Korea. In some parts of Korea, you get these like prostitute areas. They're more like middle-aged ladies that sit in this little wooden huts with a cocktail, and businessmen go in there for some comfort or whatever. It's not just prostitution. They go in there and just spend time drinking and talking. And anyway, so they paint them in a bright color. This was in Mapo, I think. So I was walking home and I walked past and I saw this. I took my phone out and started taking pictures, crouching on the ground, taking pictures of this. And later I realized, oh, these buildings are prostitute places, so people might think I'm a right weirdo, maybe trying to look through this hole or something. Anyway, so I just found it interesting that these took on similar shapes, and I was wondering what caused it. And so, but even the splashes, the way water splashes like that, it all branches out. So I took these pictures, and especially this blurry one, and then I realized, oh, there's a picture of a 500-mile long branch of the Amazon River, and it seems a bit crazy to me that this dried cement liquid stain outside of a prostitute's hut takes an almost exact same shape as a 500-mile long, 1,000-mile long branch of the Amazon River in the jungle in Brazil. And yeah, I just found it fascinating. And of course, it's the same forces. The principle which dictates the course that this river goes is, if the river meets a bit of high ground or a bit of low ground, it just takes the most efficient course down. And whatever squashed onto this to cause this to happen was the exact same principle. This is paint somebody spilt on the ground. This is milk inside a plastic container of milk that somebody drank in a cafe. I just looked at it and I just saw these branching structures, so I had to take a picture. More paint on the ground. You can tell somebody was on a motorbike here and something was, or a car, and liquids spilling out as they did a 3-point turn. So they spilled it out. And again, what determines this little bit of water spilled down here and not down the middle part, or that it didn't go completely evenly? It's the same branching structure principle. Same with these branching structures of water. Sometimes I look like a lunatic. I'm walking down the street, I see something fascinating like this, and I just start taking pictures of it. This is something that somebody just threw onto the ground, and it just spread out. But again, it didn't just evenly spread out. There's always a contest. This principle of the scales goes into action, and there's always a contest of pressures, and whatever wins dictates the shape. I took this just a week or so ago. Sometimes I'm too lazy to make a full meal, so I just gobble some ham. But I put some salad cream on it. So I put some salad cream on, but I put too much salad cream on, so I turn it upside down and put it on top of the other slice of ham and give it a bit of a squash. And then when I opened it, I mean, this piece of ham doesn't look that different from this this stain that I took 15 years earlier on the ground, the salad cream distribution. And again, it's the same principle. I put some pressure on it by squashing the piece of ham down, and the salad cream was just formed into that shape because it just squashed in the direction of the path of least resistance. All right, I don't know how to delete this message on Twitch. Somebody's spamming there. How do you delete spammy Twitch messages? Oh well, I'll do it later. Ignore that. So yeah, I just found that quite fascinating. Oops, gotta get back to the folders. Is there any more, or is that, yeah, that's the last one for that. Really, this talk could have been 2 or 3 talks because it's going to be quite long, but I don't mind that. All right. I haven't got a lot of examples here, but I know there are a lot out there, so I really need to create more. These are the way we visualize information. I believe this is different periods in evolution. This was just an interesting poster I found in Korea on the wall. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I actually wanted to dwell on this for a while. This is a subway map in Korea. Was it Shindang Station? So this is a subway map in Korea. And what's interesting about this to me is that if you look at a tree, up to now, all I've been talking about is the structure of trees. But in another talk, I'll be talking about the function of trees. So the 2 main functions that most people are aware of with trees are osmosis and photosynthesis. That is, the roots of the tree, in fact, let me grab a picture of an actual tree just to, what's the best one? Yeah, of course, the first one I used. So if you look at the roots of the tree, what they do is they gather water, mainly, other nutrients, water from all the ground surrounding the tree. And then they channel the water all the way up to the trunk. Then throughout the branches, it diverges throughout the branches into the leaves and the fruit and the nuts. Otherwise, what would happen to all those leaves in the hot sun and the wind all day long? They just dry out instantly. So they get supplied with water from the branches. But in return, the leaves capture the sunlight and they convert it into a starch, which is kind of a sugar nutrition. And then they channel the starch and sugar nutrition all the way back down, which revitalizes and feeds the roots, keeps the roots healthy and alive. So it's like a mutual benefit. Osmosis is, transferring the water to the branches and leaves. Photosynthesis is converting sunlight energy into starch and sugar and transferring it down to the roots. And so what I found interesting was, let me just side by side these maybe. So what I found interesting was, up until now I've been talking about the structure of trees. So I'm going to now make a note about the function of trees. But for that, you need to hang on a second because I just need to go to the toilet for a moment. So I'll be back in 60 seconds. And we're back. Yes, I do have a reputation with my friends for being really fast when I go to the toilet. So yeah, as I was saying, I've been showing you a huge number of pictures of all the disparate aspects of the universe, from the cosmic to the micro, and showing how there's tree structure in everything. But when we study trees, not just actual trees, but things with tree structure, it's interesting to consider, especially within, you could say, living organisms, what the function is, not just what the structure is. So, sure, the human body has a certain structure, and now we've made it clear that it's almost completely structured in branching. Maybe I should use the word branching structure rather than tree structure, because when we use the word tree, it kind of makes people think of what we think of actual trees. So branching structure, the body's just, everything is branching structure. But there's a function to the body, right? It's not just that it happens to be a branching structure. The human body has so many functions. Just the transportation of blood, of hormones and chemicals, of food, the nervous system transmitting information, the lymphatic system, which I believe the lymphatic system prevents leakage. So when something leaks from your vascular system outside of the pathways of the veins and jugular and arteries, the stuff leaking around in your body, the lymphatic system takes care of that, cleans it up. And then the endocrine system is, I believe that regulates all the hormones throughout the body. Anyways, so there's functions, it's not just structure, there's also function. And the function of a tree, as we can see in this picture, is that, let me just big it up a bit more. Yeah, the The function of a tree is that there's osmosis with the trees supplying liquids and moisture for the upper branches of the tree and the leaves. And there's photosynthesis where the tree supplies sugar energy to the roots to keep them fresh and alive. Of course, the tree does other things as well. For example, I remember being surprised watching Richard Feynman, a physicist, giving a speech where he pointed out that most of the mass of a tree doesn't come from the ground. It's not like it eats food from the ground and that's why the tree gets bigger, like we eat food as children and we grow bigger over years. Most of the mass of a tree comes from it absorbing carbon dioxide from the air, and then it just adds that to the mass of itself. But the main function we're aware of with a tree is osmosis and photosynthesis. So when I started to notice that everything has a tree structure, even cracks in plates, and I thought streets have tree structure as well. But then it started to get pretty freaky when I started to notice not only do we have similar branching structure in our information systems and our body and the streets and the buildings and highways to trees, but there's actually some similarity in function too. So think about it. Let's look at this subway map here. And all around this subway map was huge apartment buildings. Korea has lots of high-rise apartment buildings. And they're not like depressing high-rises you might get in London, for example. They're actually really nice because each unit, each apartment has a family. And Korean families are very homogenous, not just racially, but almost every family I ever met in Korea, I almost never met a single parent family. They're all two parents families. And almost every single family had 2 children. Not 3, not 1, not 5, exactly 2. Part of that's because of government policies that encourage it that way. But so, you can get a small area like this and it could just be, it could have 100 high-rise buildings with 20 or 30 stories and just so many families in there. And yeah, it's a nice area. I love Korea. And so it occurred to me one day that all these people, they're like the roots of a plant, right? So the plant supplies water, life-giving water to the upper branches of the tree. So all these people, just like the water in the ground, they're all in their individual apartments, right? And they're all growing and developing and studying and enjoying family life and nurturing. And then every morning, what do? They leave their apartments individually and they go down the little alleyways and small streets. And then they see other people going to work as well, doing the same thing. And then these trickles of water, they start to converge like the water coming down a mountainside in small rivulets. And they converge until they get into bigger streets like this one. And then they converge more until they get to the main road. And then often in big cities, you just see just huge crowds of people heading for the subway station. And then this subway station have different branches, just like the roots of a tree. And then they all enter through those converging branches until they all converge onto the subway train, the platform, get on the train. And then the train, just like the trunk of a tree, goes along the trunkway on the underground channel. Or it could be buses, or it could be planes, or it could be any way to get to work. So, or it could be their own cars on the motorways. So using the subway analogy, all the people come on there and they all go there. And then when they get to their destination, they disperse. And they first disperse in big crowds onto the bigger streets, and then they find where their offices or their factories or their shops or wherever their work they do is. They disperse in smaller and smaller, and they spread out just like the water does at the top of a tree, go to their offices and their companies. And then what they do is they work all day to create products and services. And then those products and services get traded for things. And then at the end of the month, they get their salary, money. And then what do they do with those salaries? They all leave their office or the factory or the shop at the end of the day on payday. And then they all converge back again, just like the branches of the tree with the leaves collecting the sunlight and the sugar starch. And then they all converge again and they all come back down the trunk, and then they reach this station, and then they all go out of their individual exit, whatever their exit is, and then they diverge more and more and more until finally they're on a side street where there's just a few of them, and then they reach their individual apartments and go inside and diverge more. And the money they bring back enables their family to be healthy and to live and to take care of their children and to have a nice home and to have enough food and even leisure, do things for leisure. And so it's really, this structure is not just like a tree where it's converging at the roots and diverging at the branches, where they converge in the apartment blocks and all come into the subway station and go to work and diverge at the destination and go to the offices. But what they take with them is their skills and their labor and their hard work and their knowledge. And then they deliver that, and their companies create fruit, right? This fruit is like the product of their labor or their design or intelligence or whatever it is they do at their company. And then conversely, the company receives from its customers or whoever it deals with money for its services or its goods and distributes them, and all that money gets sent back down the trunk along the subway line back to the individual families to revitalize the families. So it's fascinating that the way human life works is we just organically created these branching structures, diverging and converging branching structures that just happen to map onto what we see in trees or biological systems or galaxies or tiny little particles. And it's just a similar, even though every single one is unique and different in different certain ways, they all conform to this similar branching structure, or most things do, converging and diverging. And it depends which way you look at it, because if you start at the top of the tree and you track it down with your eye, everything's converging and it diverges when it gets to the roots. But if you look at the bottom where the roots are, everything's converging, going up the trunk and diverging. So the words converge and diverge are actually subjective in that sense. But it is interesting how we see the same functional principle that we see in trees as well. And it's not just on a localized level. It's also true on a national level. Let's see if I can. Let me just. Oh yeah, this is on hereditary maps. We also see a branching structure, right? We see converging and diverging. Like all your great grandparents, which are 8, and then their children became 4. Your grandparents, their children became 2, and their children became you. And then if you get married and have children, you might have 2 or 3 children, and then you have 5 or 6 or 10 grandchildren and 20 or 30 great grandchildren. Again, the converging and diverging. I'm going to get back to that. What is this one? This is a language map of all the different languages in Europe. This is an evolutionary tree. But if I can just, to make that point, information systems. Yeah, I'm going to come back to that point in it. Here it is. This is what I was looking for. So actually, this is the flight path. Again, we get that same networking branching structure. So it's interesting. It's interesting that I was talking. Oh, okay. This is a subway map of what London would look like if it was represented, how the lines actually work. Again, the branching and trains of the structures. There's Europe. These are different animal types. We don't just have flora and fungi and flora. We have all sorts of animal types. Again, the branching structure. It's everywhere. This is I took this picture outside Hyde Park. They're installing fiber optics. Yeah, so this is a great picture. So this is a port with container ships. So I talked earlier about how people are like the roots of a tree. They all go to the subway station. They all go along the trunk. They all branch out then to the offices and provide the lubrication for the company, like the water. And then they get the analogous to starch, sugar starch. They get the salary, and that comes back down to the roots where it can take care of everything that's to do with the roots and keep the whole system going. But on a national level, it's also true. So if a company makes a product, the company on a national level or on a company-wide level will also. So the example I just gave was like individuals working for the company, but now each company in a country becomes like one node or one branch of the roots, and each company contributes products. If you think about it, do I have a pencil? Yeah, I have a pencil here. Let's take, for example, this. This is a great example. I love this example. It's just a pencil, right? How simple can it get? It's not going to focus because it's got facial recognition software. But how simple can a pencil be? But let's imagine in one country, there's one company that they make pencils. And actually pencils, they require a lot of companies just for a pencil to come into existence. So you need the company that provides the wood, you need the company that provides the graphite in the middle of the pencil, you need the company that does the shaping of the wood, another company probably shapes the graphite once they get the raw materials. The pencil's painted, so you need a company to do the chemicals that make the paint, then a company that mix paints and provide paints. Then you got like a printing company to print the pencil brand on there. Then another company probably does the dipping. And then some of those licensed companies will do those aspects, but eventually they'll all converge like the roots, different aspects of a product. Imagine how complicated a phone must be with thousands of companies, not millions maybe, but thousands of companies that do different things. And slowly they all converge in the supply chain and they all come together. And then a company like Apple or the pencil manufacturing Acme Pencil Company, they do the kind of final stages where they just put it all together and package it. And then so you've got your final product, which is something like a pencil, right? And then I'm not saying every container here is full of pencils, but this is a basic idea. And then this country exports pencils. It's the #1 country to export pencils in the world. And so they then converge all those products. One of the containers might be full of pencils, another might be full of Samsung phones, another might be full of hats. It could be anything. And then that's the produce of this country. And then they go on the ocean for a few thousand miles. So now we've got all the people working in the offices and factories making stuff, all converging and converging. And then you reach the port. That's like where the tree breaks free of the ground, and it just has, for a while, it just has the trunk. And then it goes onto the ocean, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 miles to Los Angeles in the port there. And then when it gets to that port, what happens to all those containers? They all got removed. Let me just big this up so I know what's coming next. They all get removed from the container ship. And then I don't think this is going to be a good representation, but once they get removed from the Ever Given. That's a coincidence. Isn't that the one that got stuck in the Panama Canal? I've had this picture for years, but I just realized it is the one that got stuck in the Panama Canal. Oops. Anyway, so they once they arrive and they get taken off the ports, this is a different meaning, this map, but I'll use it as an example. So they're in San Francisco or LA, and then the produce gets taken off and split up. Some of it will go to Washington, some of it will go to Phoenix, some of it will go to Denver. And in big amounts, they'll be shipped on trains or wherever to those ports. And then they'll get split up again, and some will go to different suburbs, like stations where they supply the local supermarkets. And then they'll get split up even further, and then they'll be sent to the supermarkets, and then the supermarkets will stock them, and then people will come into the supermarkets and buy them in small quantities, and then they'll get split up even further until they reach their final destination point, which is somebody's house or some student's backpack or some school or some office using pencils and other products. And so then we've seen all this converging root system in an economy, in a country, where all these products come together. Then they go along a trunk system, and then they branch out and spread out, go to the final destination. And then what happens is the person who bought the pack of pencils in the shop, they hand over $10 or $5, and then all that money starts to converge. Just like the sugar starch that leaves manufacture from converting sunlight, it all starts to converge, and then all that money, everybody gets their cut, and all that money goes to the people that received it in the port. Everybody gets paid off along the way, and then finally, of course it happens with wire transfer these days, but finally the money goes to the country of origin. And then the big company gets the big payment for selling all the pencils or whatever they're selling. But then they have to pay their suppliers. And the suppliers have to pay their suppliers. And their suppliers have to pay their suppliers until eventually there's no more suppliers because you got to the foundational level. And then those final suppliers have to pay all their employees. And so their employees then get on the subway or the bus or whatever and go home and use that money to take care of their family. So again, even on an international level, we're seeing that kind of same roots and branch structure level, not just the structure, but also the function of one side providing goods and the other side providing money. You can use the analog of water or sugar charge interchangeably again. So yeah, I just find that quite fascinating, and you just see it everywhere in commerce, in travel. So look at some of them. These are rail networks, and just a city structure. I think again, it's Dubai. This is an interesting one. I should have put this one in the biology one. So I showed you a picture of a heart before, and interesting. They do call main roads arteries, and so this is an old 18th century map of Coventry. But it actually looks like a heart, doesn't it? And that's exactly how we think of it. Is you've got these smaller roads and these, just like the vascular system, and then you've got the arteries, and the traffic is transporting people. Whereas the arteries, oh, wait, I've got it here. Why isn't it jimbling? There it is. So maybe we should put them side by side. So yeah, the arteries, they transport blood cells, which themselves transport, just like containers on ships, which themselves transport all the oxygen and all the chemicals and all the hormones that the body needs for different functions. And the road systems, what do? They transport people. In those days, it was horse and cars, but today it's in cars and buses. They transport people, and the people bring with them their skills or all sorts of things that they do, and they go to different aspects of the body of society. And yeah, they perform a function. So it's structure and function. Let's just have a look at some of this picture. These are branching structures of companies. It turns out that almost all the products we use are basically run by 5 or 10 companies. Again, flight paths. This is Manhattan Island with you can see the branching of the streets by the busy streets, busy driving path. This is a satellite picture of America, more flight paths, driving, different vehicle driving pathways. Of course, when we go back to Manhattan, people often know that there's a difference between human-created systems like this, where everything's angular and straight. So actually I have a talk coming up called Straight Lines and Curves. And it addresses some deep things related to this talk, and it also explores this myth that humans are unnatural because everything we do is so angular and straight lines. This idea that everything in nature is more flowing and nature doesn't do things in straight lines. It's actually nonsense, but it's an interesting talk. I'll be going into that. So yeah, I love these pictures that show all the branching structures and everything to do. This is I'm not a mathematician, in fact I'm horrible at math, but this is called a minimum spanning tree. And it's a kind of a principle by which you have to cover certain nodes in the most efficient time and space efficient, move efficient method, how to get to each point. This is a rocket launching site. I think it's Cape Canaveral. It's crazy. And this is just a picture, some marketing picture of something I saw that I just found attractive. This is a sale. I think it's in London, or maybe, well, yeah, I think it's in London or New York, but it's like a January 1st sale. But it's just interesting when you watch human behavior. They all come from the roots of their homes and all converge together on transport to get to the one area. And then when the doors open, they just explode in diversion. As one person goes for a bag, another person goes for a pair of shoes, or whatever they want to buy. And yeah, there's no real structure to their behavior. The structure of the building is dictated, but their behavior is determined by each individual person. And yeah, they just create a crazy tree structure as they fight each other for the sails. And last one is, well, there's that one again. Wait, I've done that one. All right, okay. I'm not bringing it up right. Am I getting it wrong? Oh, okay, there we go. It's like a representation of a tree. This is a picture of a jet as the space shuttle took off, which is crazy. So again, if there's a lot of factors that go into making a pencil, and there is, then something as complex as space shuttles, just millions of people around the world for tens, hundreds of years, just converging technology so this kind of thing can happen. Then what happens? It all converging to one focal point, like the roots of a tree converging, and then the central trunk goes up and it goes into space. And then just look at the next 200 or 300 or 400 years, what's going to happen as a result of that spaceship being in space. It's just going to branch out until all space is colonized. So you even get the same converging root, trunk, and branching system there. It's fascinating. This is a nebula where stars are created. So it's basically a gas cloud, which is like the size of a tenth of a galaxy or something. And then gravity causes all the gas to compress until it's so hot and so dense, it ignites into a sun. But it's interesting how I'm not quite sure why I have to research this, how it makes that kind of similar branching structure. And this is, I believe, a quasar or something like that. This is a visualization of a supernova, or just it's a particle accelerator when they smash into each other. And this is kind of like a fractal. This is a representation of the different stages of the Big Bang. I'm not sure whether I should describe this as converging or diverging, because you've got all the soup after the Big Bang, but then it separates itself, it diverges into distinct elements. So it's both. It all diverges into distinct elements and subatomic particles. But then once that's done, they all start to converge to create higher life forms like molecules and eventually star systems and planets, and then eventually life on planets like plants and animals, and then eventually human beings and all the wonderful things we're creating. So this is a cross-section of the universe. I've shown that one already. Got that one already. It's just some kind of mathematical structure. Yeah, I'm not really a mathematician or an engineer, but I think this is research on they have a program which just uses a branching structure. Fractal studies. I took this picture of a couch I sat on once at my church. I just looked down and I saw that it was an IKEA couch with a denim cover. Again, I just looked at the creases in the couch, and obviously, what did I see? The thing that I see everywhere. A branching structure, even in the creases. So yeah, it's the reason why this is called season 0. Let me just shut these down. I think I'm going to sneeze. Hang on. Excuse me. Should have pressed the cough button, shouldn't I? Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, the reason why it's called season 0 of Pathfinding is because these talks, I have about 50 of them, they're quite complex and deep, not just in the details, but in the philosophical significance. And so I'm actually developing them. But I find that I'm better at developing something if I actually give the talk than if I just sit down at my computer and just start developing the talk. Because then I can see what I tried to express, what I understood so far, what the limitations are. And then I'll watch the video over, and then I'll refine it. And I'll come across parts where I just went on too long about this, or another part where I just wasn't clear. And so every time I give the same talk, I'll refine it more and more. And and pare down the presentation materials. Like I showed hundreds of pictures tonight, but obviously what I'll do is I'll go through each segment and I'll pick the best 2 or 3 pictures of each one. And so this talk is really more of an exploration of the topic rather than me giving a fully formed talk on it. And so I'm going to go through the whole 50 or 60 episodes. Some of it will be ontological stuff about the universe and nature like this. Some of it, like the next couple of talks, will be like the meaning of biblical stories. And I don't mean the religious meaning of biblical stories. I mean the actual meaning that means something to us, whether you're religious or not. In a similar way to, I'm a Christian and a believer, but in a similar way that Jordan Peterson talks about the Bible, he doesn't necessarily do it from the point of view of a believer in God and Jesus and those kind of things. So every time I give these talks, sometimes they'll be ontological about natural world, sometimes they'll be more spiritual about metaphysical things. And but most of the time there'll be a combination of both, because my idea is that it's the exact same principles behind the spiritual eternal things and the temporary physical world. The exact same principle is what dictated both the way both of them are. And it's just that with science we get a bit of an easier time understanding the natural world to some degree. And well, I mean, I think that's why God made the natural world the way it is, in order to teach us these fundamental things. And then with what we call spiritual things, I think they're a bit harder to understand because they're a bit more nebulous. They're not things we can see and put in a petri dish or prod with electrodes and test. But we can do research on things of the heart and things of the soul by living a certain way and seeing, do we feel happy? Living another way and do we feel miserable? Then we can chart a course. We can pathfind, if you will, through experience. And so, yeah, this talk isn't very focused. I do understand that. And it's about exact same length as my last talk, which was 2 hours. And so I'm going to go through all the talks. And I'll refine them each time. And let me just get rid of this. I'll refine them each time. And each time I will ideally improve them. Hang on, I just need to take a picture of something that's on my screen related to my video encodec. There. So, but I think, through watching this talk, if you stick with it and you got some understanding about how branching structure is part of everything in life. That's not new knowledge, by the way. That's something that lots of people have known already. But I think there are some deeper things behind it, because sometimes there's a habit we have of recognizing something, and even though it's amazing, we can be lulled into a kind of ignorance by recognizing how simple and clear it is. Like a friend of mine once said, "Oh, that's just mathematics. Mathematics decides all that branching structure." But that's not the meaning behind it. That's just a description of it. So there are aspects to this. So as I said, this is my first pathfinding topic. The first 2 were introductions. And almost every talk I give after this will come back to this topic. For example, I'll be talking about why the Bible tries to say that God made Eve from Adam's rib. Again, as a preview, I'll be mentioning that the rib is a metaphor for a branch. It's a branching structure from the bone structure. So I'll be using some of this theory about branching structure to make it clear what that story means. And the very next talk will be why the book of Genesis tries to, well, doesn't try to, it says that in the Garden of Eden there was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. Again, we're talking about trees and branching structures, and most people like to just think in terms of metaphor or poetry, or even just think literally there was 2 trees called those things. But I'm always thinking about mechanics. That's why I went into a deep dive into trying to understand the nature of branching structures and trees, not just the structure, but their function. So usually you look at structure, function, and purpose. And so purpose is more of a philosophical question, but structure and function can be scientific. So I did a deep dive in trying to understand structure and function of of branching systems, not just plants, but as I showed you with economic systems. And through doing that, I developed a much deeper understanding of what the phrase tree of life or tree of knowledge of good and evil means. So that's the next talk. In a way, I'll be shifting to metaphysics and theology and spirituality, but it'll be really a continuation of this talk about branching structures. So my plan is to sort of fuse the worlds of the natural world and naturalism and science with theology and philosophy, metaphysics and spirituality, and show that even though they look so different from each other, behind them is the exact same principle. In the same way that I showed tonight that an actual tree growing in a forest, the structure and function is very similar to an economic system of people living in a city and going to their office and doing things. They look like nothing. I mean, one's the thing and one's just a structure of beings and the way they live. But actually, I think I showed that not only the structure, but the function is kind of the same. And so in the same way that things in the natural world that we look at with science and things of the spirit and of our eternal soul, I think they are also the same in that they are grounded on the same principles. And so I've got lots of talks about that. It's neither a religious channel nor a scientific channel. Definitely not a scientist, but it's something more whole than that. So I think, tune in for the next talk. That will be, again, today I started at Tuesday at 7 p.m. and the next talk will also be a Tuesday at 7 p.m. And if I get more efficient at preparing and doing these things, then I might even give more talks per week. But for now, once a week I think is great. So thanks for watching. And if you're watching on one of the channels, check out the other channels. So we've got Facebook on the Pathfinding Facebook page. We've got Pathfinding on YouTube channel, and then somebody's got Pathfinding on Twitch, so I had to call it Life Pathfinding, which is fine because I like that phrase as well. So yeah, maybe subscribe or follow on each of those, and then you can decide which one you like watching on. And let's have a look. Somebody sent me some messages, but I don't think they mean anything. Vor OMG. Mark Riley wrote hello, so I don't know if you're still watching, Mark, but hello to you. Thanks for watching. And okay. So I'll see you next Tuesday at 7 p.m. sharp, and we'll talk about the tree of life, the tree of knowledge, good and evil, from a scientific, philosophical point of view, not so much religion. All right, so good night. Have a great week.